Welcome to Tiger Moon. Welcome back to part 2 of season 2 of The Haunted Village. In the previous episode, we heard that when Ramin returned to the village, he discovered that the school had been demolished and the doctor still hadn't come back. One of the villagers offered him a house near the abandoned hill, but it seemed that there was something terribly wrong with that house as well. Let's continue the story. It was unbelievable. I pinched myself several times. But I wasn't dreaming. Everything I was seeing was real. The three goats were clearly visible beneath the moonlight, standing on the snow-covered ground. They slowly walked toward the abandoned house and disappeared into the darkness of the ruins. I was so shocked that I stood frozen on the rooftop for nearly 10 minutes. Then, as if my whole body had caught fire, I suddenly snapped out of it and ran toward the edge of the roof. I rushed down the stairs as fast as I could, but suddenly my foot slipped and I tumbled down the last few steps. My right hand slammed into the ground and was badly injured. I tried to get up from the snow, but I couldn't. Slowly my eyes began to close and I lost consciousness. Thank God I woke up before freezing to death in the cold. I realized that I couldn't feel my legs. Using my hands, I dragged myself toward the stairs and painfully pulled myself back up. As soon as I entered the house, the pain in my legs finally hit me. I realized that I couldn't feel my legs. Using my hands, I dragged myself toward the stairs and forced myself to climb them. As soon as I got inside the house, the pain in my legs finally began. I spent about 10 minutes sitting beside the electric heater, massaging my legs until I could feel them again. Of course, the feeling returned with intense pain. After I felt a little better, I pulled the blanket over myself and quickly fell asleep. When I woke up, it was almost 11 in the morning. The sky had turned gray again, and it was snowing. I couldn't even get out of bed. Exhausted, I closed my eyes and fell asleep once more. Some time later, I woke up to the sound of someone knocking on the front door. It felt like whoever it was had nothing better to do. For nearly 10 minutes, they kept knocking softly and slowly. I could even hear it in my sleep. It was as if the person behind the door was being strangely polite. When I finally became fully awake, I was shocked. It was already nighttime, and the snowfall had become even heavier. Before I could get out of bed, I felt a sharp pain in my wrist. My mind had been so overwhelmed that I hadn't even noticed the physical pain. The more alert I became, the worse my wrist hurt. Then I suddenly remembered my chickens. I threw my coat over my shoulders and headed for the basement. The marks from my fall were still visible in the snow. I switched on the light and walked downstairs. When I saw 4 eggs lying beside one of the barrels, I couldn't help but smile. I scattered 4 or 5 handfuls of wheat on the floor and carried the eggs back upstairs. I wanted to make something to eat, but my injured hand wouldn't let me. I cracked 2 eggs, separated the yolks, mixed them with a little turmeric, and spread the mixture over my wrists. Since there wasn't a clean piece of cloth anywhere in the house, I wrapped my undershirt around it. Less than 10 minutes later, the pain in my wrist began to ease. Then it was time for dinner. After eating, I leaned against the wall in front of the television and pulled the blanket over my legs once again. That was when everything that had happened the previous night started replaying in my mind. I tried to distract myself by watching TV, but it felt as if every channel was showing those same 3 talking goats. I wanted to sleep, but I had already slept so much that I wasn't tired anymore. A feeling deep inside kept telling me, there is no escape. I kept changing channels, hoping time would pass. Then suddenly, I heard a faint noise. I lowered the volume of the television. It sounded like it was coming from the basement. The chickens, something had gotten to my beloved chickens. Without even taking off my coat, I rushed out of the room. I ran down the stairs and opened the basement door. I couldn't believe my eyes. One of the chickens was lying motionless on the floor. As if I had lost someone dear to me, I rushed over and knelt beside it. I gently shook it several times, but it had left me forever. The strange thing was that there wasn't a single wound on its body. Once again, my restless mind began searching for explanations. Maybe it had simply died of old age. After all, a predator wouldn't leave a body untouched, but if it had died naturally, why had the chickens been making so much noise only a few minutes earlier? Something had frightened them. The thought made my blood boil. I started throwing barrels and old junk all over the basement, desperately hoping to find whatever had killed my chicken. The 3 surviving chickens had huddled together near the basement door. After giving up my search for the killer, I carried the chickens upstairs one by one and placed them inside the kitchen. Once I knew they were safe, I returned to the basement to deal with the dead chicken. Instead of burying it, I thought it would be better to leave it as food for the wild animals around the village. I picked up the lifeless chicken and climbed back upstairs. After turning off the basement light, I was about to throw it over the wall, but my injured hand had gone numb again, so I gave up. As afraid as I was to open the front door, it seemed I had no other choice. Quietly, I whispered, "In the name of God." Then I slowly opened the door. The entire alley was covered with fresh snow. It was obvious that no one had passed through there. I was about to throw the dead chicken into one of the nearby gardens when my eyes suddenly froze right in front of my door. There was a pair of footprints. My temples immediately began pounding again. My mind desperately searched for a logical explanation but found none. The footprints had only 4 toes. There was no heel. There wasn't even a 5th toe. It looked as though someone had been walking only on their toes. Or rather, standing on them, because there were no other footprints anywhere in the alley, only those. Then I remembered the knocking from a couple of hours earlier. Fear burst through my body. I threw the dead chicken beside the wall and slammed the door shut. I needed to call Mohammed and ask him to come over, but before I could even move toward the stairs, my legs gave out, for good reason. A sinister figure was standing behind the basement door, staring directly at me. The basement was too dark to make out its face, but I could clearly see its eyes, those cursed familiar eyes. Yes, they looked like the old woman's eyes, but I was certain it wasn't her. These eyes were larger, and instead of white, they had a sickly yellow color. No matter how hard I tried, I couldn't faint. For a moment, I thought about opening the front door and running toward the end of the street, but before my brain could even tell my legs to move, someone kicked the front door. The impact was so powerful that it threw me several feet forward. Then, the knocking started again. Steady, rhythmic, over and over. I was certain that whoever was outside was not human, and it had not come to help me. Before some demon came crashing down from the sky, I ran into the bedroom. Just like always, I locked the door. Then I rushed toward my phone. I called Mohammed. Nothing happened. Only then did I realize there was no signal. I wanted to hold one of my chickens to calm myself down, but I was terrified that they might suddenly start talking too and give me a heart attack. I took refuge in the television. I turned the volume up and loudly recited Surah At-Tawhid throughout the house. The cursed knocking wouldn't stop. I regretted not running away when I still had the chance. I was lost in my thoughts when suddenly my phone started ringing. Overjoyed, I threw myself toward it. It was as if someone was making fun of me. The phone kept ringing without its screen even lighting up. Disappointed and exhausted, I tossed it onto the blanket. I was about to stand up again when something happened. A tall, thin shadow was standing behind the front door. I noticed the doorknob slowly moving downward. When I came back to my senses, my throat was burning from the strain. I had been screaming uncontrollably for nearly 5 minutes. Part of me wanted to open the door and end it all, but I couldn't. As I struggled in despair, the knocking started again. This time, it sounded normal. I realized the shadow behind the door had disappeared. It seemed that an actual person had heard my screams. I stood up, ready to go outside, but suddenly doubt crept into my mind. Maybe this was another trick. Maybe they wanted to show themselves again. Then again, they hadn't needed the unopened door before. Perhaps something was preventing them from coming inside. I didn't know. Even if a human could disappear and teleport, they would still be terrifying. The knocking came again. This time it was louder. Whoever it was had started banging on the door with a stone. Trusting in God, I unlocked the bedroom door. A few moments later, I heard the familiar voice of the old bathhouse keeper. He sounded cold and was calling my name. I was so happy that I ran to the front door like a child. Haji Adola was standing there once again, holding a cooking pot. The moment I saw him, I hugged him as if I had just met Scarlett Johansson. I burst into tears. Without pulling away, Haji said, "What's wrong? Don't tell me loneliness has damaged your mind." Still crying, I replied, "I wish it was only loneliness. Being alone isn't the problem. It's the ones who come when you're alone." It seemed he immediately understood that something serious had happened. He gently pulled me away and we went inside. After I finally calmed down, I told him everything from beginning to end. From the talking goats to the shadow I had seen behind the door. Haji rubbed his wrinkled hands together and said, "What can I say? I guess the bad dream I had wasn't meaningless after all. I fell asleep earlier tonight. I dreamed that a pack of dogs had surrounded my house, barking non-stop. You were screaming in fear and calling for help. That's why I came here under the excuse of bringing you dinner." I wiped away my tears and said, "What better excuse could there be? May God bless you." When I opened the pot, I found rice and game stew, with 3 giant turnips sitting on top. Surprised, I asked, "Is this turnip pilaf?" Haji pulled one of the turnips out and laughed. "What kind of nonsense is turnip pilaf? These are separate. I brought them so you wouldn't catch a cold." I thanked him and immediately started eating the turnips. Haji suggested I should eat the stew first. Embarrassed, I replied, no, I want the stew to get rid of the taste of the turnips. I had just finished dinner when we heard the sound of a motorcycle. A few moments later, someone knocked on the door. Haji stood up and said he would answer it. A few minutes later, Muhammad Javad walked inside with another cooking pot, followed by Haji. The moment he saw me, he looked worried. What happened? Did Haji beat you up? The old bathhouse keeper frowned and said, it wouldn't hurt if you thought before speaking. I could beat him if I wanted to. Muhammad put the pot on the floor and asked, then what happened? As I pulled the pot closer to myself, I said, Haji, you explain. Haji briefly told him what had happened. Muhammad stared at me in disbelief. Finally, he spoke. What surprises me is, why don't they ever show themselves to me? Haji laughed. Because they know you don't have the guts. For a brief moment, I actually felt proud. Did that mean I had enough courage for them to bother me? Still struggling to believe everything he had heard, Muhammad asked, so this house is haunted too? Haji glanced at me and asked, don't you have any tea? I lifted my head from the pot and replied, no, but the samovar has kerosene. Haji sighed. Well done. No, this house isn't haunted. If it were, Akbar Sadegi's daughter and son-in-law wouldn't have lived here for 10 years. Now that I was full and looking for answers, I asked, then what are those things that keep coming after me? They even killed my poor chicken. Muhammad asked about the chicken. When he found out I had left the carcass outside the front door, he scolded me. Wolves come close to the village during this season. Don't ever do that again. Then he turned back to Haji and continued questioning him. It seemed my situation had given him the perfect excuse. Haji asked Muhammad to make some tea. The poor man looked like it was already past his bedtime. When Muhammad returned, Yadola began speaking. I've never seen anything with my own eyes, but someone I completely trust told me this story. Several years ago, the late Sheikh's father brought a man here to remove the curse from the hill. The two of them walked toward the hill. When they got close, the man suddenly stopped and said, if we go any farther, they'll harm us. The Sheikh's father asked, who? Where? The man rubbed a special oil over his eyes. The Sheikh's father later said he was trembling with fear. He claimed he saw countless beings shaped like goats moving across the rooftops above the hill. It was as if that place was their own city. After that, the man buried 2 or 3 protective prayers at the foot of the hill and said that from then on they would become more limited. But after the night call to prayer, anyone who went near the hill would be responsible for whatever happened to them. Haji continued. That so-called exorcist also spoke about a curse that would remain on the hill for 3 generations. Only after that would people be able to return and live there again. Then he cursed the sorcerer and left. No matter how much we insisted that he stay until the tea was ready, he refused. From that night on, Muhammad Javad stayed with me. We made another agreement as well. No one was to hear about what had happened to me. That was Haji Yadola's advice. January finally came to an end and school started again. From Saturday to Thursday, we gathered with the children on the upper floor of the mosque. Everyone was happy with their exam results. Even the weakest students in the class had received high grades. When I complained to Muhammad about giving everyone such generous grades, he laughed and said, don't be so hard on them. They're not going to become doctors or engineers. They'll study for 5 or 6 years, then go back to herding goats and sheep. Ever since Muhammad started staying with me, I stopped seeing strange things. I stopped hearing strange sounds, but my nightmares continued. Most nights, I dreamed that a goat was riding on my shoulders as we walked toward the bathhouse. Whenever I told Muhammad about those dreams, he only laughed. Thankfully, there wasn't much work during the winter. Every morning, he went to the stable, took care of their 4 or 5 sheep, and then came back home. He cooked around the house like a perfect homemaker. The variety of his meals wasn't great, but that wasn't the point. What mattered was that I wasn't alone anymore. The winter days passed one after another, and I found myself waiting for spring, not because I wanted the season to change, but because I wanted my vacation to begin. Before I knew it, every day had turned into evening. Then Mohammed and I would sit in front of the television, talking nonsense until we fell asleep. Mohammed was still uncertain about everything Haji Yadola had told us. Even after seeing my condition with his own eyes, he still couldn't believe that a hill full of jinn could exist only 200 meters away from us. One Thursday, as I was returning from the mosque, I ran into Muhammad. He invited me to spend the evening at one of his friends' houses. They were planning to have a drinking gathering. I told him I felt uncomfortable in a stranger's house. Tell your friends to come to our place instead. Muhammad hesitated. But if Akbar finds out, it could become a problem, I assured him. As long as your friends keep quiet, the owner of the house won't find out. Around 9 o'clock that night, I heard the sound of a motorcycle. A few moments later, someone knocked on the door. Three young men about our age walked inside. As soon as they unpacked their things, my eyes fell on a bottle. What an awkward situation. If I wanted to keep my reputation, I couldn't touch a single drop. After all, I was the village school teacher. One of Mohammed's friends put chicken skewers on the grill and headed out into the yard. The snow had melted, but the village air was still freezing cold. Once everything was ready, they invited me to join them for a drink. I kept acting like the well-behaved guy and refused. I noticed they never even offered any to Mohammed. Apparently he wasn't into drinking either. Besides, it would have looked strange if the village's liquor seller had been drinking his own product. Everything was going well. His friends were busy entertaining themselves while Mohammed and I smoked the hookah. Unfortunately, gatherings like that always seem to attract trouble. One of the boys, who was already completely drunk, suggested playing Spin the Bottle. I silently prayed, God, please get me out of this. I'm more afraid of these people than I am of the jinn. The bottle spun a few times, leading to harmless dares. Eventually, it stopped in front of the biggest fool among them. Since they all knew each other well, they knew exactly how to challenge one another. One of them grinned and said, go take a picture in front of Safura's house and bring it back. Before he even finished speaking, the guy rushed outside. Panicking, I ran after him to stop him, but he wasn't listening to anyone. I stood by the front door and watched him disappear into the darkness. Neither Mohammed nor the other two followed him. 5 minutes passed. No sign of him. After 10 minutes, I rushed back inside. Hasn't your friend come back yet? The one who had given him the dare called his phone. No answer. He tossed the phone onto the carpet. He's just messing with us. Finally, Mohammed stood up. And what if he isn't? The other man laughed. You actually believe this village is haunted? Mohammed replied, I'm not saying there are jinn, but there are wolves and wolf dogs around here. Eventually, he convinced everyone to go look for him. Mohammed suggested we ride our motorcycles toward the hill. If there's a wild animal out there, the noise will scare it away. Two people climbed onto each motorcycle and we headed toward the hill. I couldn't believe that because of two idiots, I was actually riding straight toward the jinn's territory. When we reached the foot of the hill, everyone stopped. The path was so rough that not even a drunk person could ride a motorcycle any farther. They called him again. Still no answer. The four of us decided to continue on foot toward Safura's mysterious house, the house of the old witch. Shivering from both fear and cold, I slipped my hand into my pocket. My fingers touched the necklace the village sheikh had given me. I immediately put it around my neck. Ever since those strange events, I always carried it with me. The man who had given the dare smirked and said, So, you think wolves are afraid of that? I answered, Shut the hell up. Though in my heart I was praying it would protect me. As we walked through the narrow alleys, we kept shouting, Yasser! Yasser! Suddenly, Mohammed's sharp ears picked up a sound. Someone was crying nearby. With obvious anxiety, Mohammed said, It's Yasser! The young men of the village didn't actually know where the witch's house was, but because the old woman had lived somewhere on the hill, everyone simply referred to the entire hill as Safura's house. Following the sound of the crying, we reached an old house deep among the dark alleys. I couldn't believe Yasser was crying. I kept expecting him to jump out and laugh at all of us. Mohammed stepped inside first, then suddenly backed away. That only made the rest of us even more curious. When we entered, the same friend who had given the dare asked, Who's that old man? Mohammed frowned. What old man? That's Yasser. From that moment, the entire place fell silent. As we walked closer, we saw Yasser sitting in the darkness, crying. Half of his hair had turned white even then. A small part of me still hoped he would suddenly stand up and laugh at us. No matter how many questions we asked, he never answered. He just kept staring in one direction. I followed his gaze, and my heart nearly stopped. Standing behind the window was the same creature I had seen in the basement. I tapped the shoulder of the third man and pointed toward it. He looked for a moment, confused. What? Did you see something? That was when I realized they couldn't see it. Mohammed immediately looked at me. Ramin, did you see something? The moment he asked that question, fear spread across his friends' faces. They quickly stepped back. Mohammed told me, help me carry Yasser. Yasser's body had become as stiff as a piece of wood. Until we reached the front door, he kept his legs lifted off the ground. Mohammed's friends brought the motorcycles over. It was almost dawn. Yasser's condition wasn't improving. Finally, Mohammed gathered his courage and said, Come on, let's take him to the Sheikh's house. Well, my friends, this is where part 2 of season 2 of The Haunted Village comes to an end. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like the video and help it reach more people. If there is no place for kindness, then be kind to the world. Instead of complaining about the narrow jar, look beyond it. May God protect you. With respect, Tiger Moon.